What if your television wasn't just showing a story, but taking control of your mind? When The Outer Limits premiered in 1963, it looked like simple sci-fi. But behind the static lurked darker truths, studio battles, eerie coincidences, and ideas decades ahead of their time. So stay tuned, because once you cross into the outer limits, the strangest secrets are the ones that never made it to air. The show that wanted to control your TV. There is nothing wrong with your television set. Those opening words weren't just eerie, they were revolutionary. The Outer Limits broke the fourth wall every week by pretending to seize control of viewers' screens. Creator Leslie Stevens wanted audiences to feel invaded, not entertained. The control voice, delivered by actor Vic Perrin, wasn't merely narration, it was psychological theater, echoing Cold War paranoia about brainwashing and invisible power. The idea that a faceless authority could hijack your senses reflected real fears of propaganda and surveillance in early 1960s America. For many families, it was unsettling. Some viewers reportedly switched off mid-broadcast, believing something was wrong with their TV. But Stevens knew what he was doing. By manipulating perception, The Outer Limits became more than science fiction. It was commentary on control itself. Television was no longer a window to another world. It was a mirror showing how easily reality could be rewritten. Psycho's writer turned sci-fi prophet. Few realize that the mind behind The Outer Limits once terrified Alfred Hitchcock. Joseph Stephano, the screenwriter of Psycho, brought psychological terror to the small screen with precision and poetry. His vision was simple. Monsters weren't the danger humans were. Stephano's influence gave the series its haunting intelligence. He filled episodes with guilt, obsession, and repressed fear, turning sci-fi tropes into case studies in human weakness. The Forms of Things Unknown hunt, for example, used time manipulation not for spectacle, but as a metaphor for trauma looping endlessly in the mind. Stephano saw television as the psychiatrist's couch of the nation, where fear of the unknown revealed the truth about ourselves. His style blurred the line between therapy and terror, making The Outer Limits less about creatures in rubber suits and more about the monsters that already lived inside us. Under his pen, science fiction became psychoanalysis, and the results were unforgettable. The budget that birthed brilliance. Each episode of The Outer Limits cost about $100, barely enough to cover 1 week of Bonanza. Yet out of that constraint came genius. Director of photography. Conrad Hall learned to treat shadow as special effects, crafting atmosphere with light and reflection instead of money. The absence of budget forced creativity. Fog-covered unfinished sets and clever camera tricks made cardboard walls feel cosmic. Episodes like The Man Who Was Never Born used optical illusions and stark contrast to suggest vast alien landscapes where none existed. Rather than hiding its limitations, the show embraced them. The result was stark, haunting television that looked more art film than primetime pulp. Decades later, filmmakers would cite it as proof that imagination, not money, creates wonder. The Outer Limits wasn't lavish, but it was alive with invention. Every shadow told a story, every constraint became art, and every flaw became part of its strange, hypnotic beauty. Beyond Control, the secret working title. Before The Outer Limits became a household phrase, the series carried a secret name, Beyond Control. Creator Leslie Stevens chose it to reflect the show's obsession with humanity's dangerous hunger for power. Early scripts and production memos reveal the title appearing on call sheets and cue cards months before the network intervened. ABC executives thought Beyond Control sounded too abstract, maybe even threatening. Ironically, that fear proved the point of the series: mankind's terror of losing control. Stevens reluctantly changed the name, but kept the theme alive in every episode. Each story explored what happens when humans push boundaries, scientific, moral, or cosmic, and lose grip on the consequences. So when the first control voice announced, "We are controlling transmission," it wasn't just the title that had changed. The message had evolved. Humanity was no longer beyond control, it was under it. When Shakespeare met science fiction. The Bolero shield wasn't just another alien encounter, It was Macbeth reborn in a laboratory. Written by Joseph Stephano, the episode follows a scientist's ambitious wife who manipulates her husband into stealing alien technology to gain fame and fortune. It's the same tragic greed that drove Lady Macbeth to ruin, reimagined with lasers instead of daggers. What makes it remarkable is how unapologetically theatrical it is. Stephano's dialogue drips with poetic rhythm, and the lighting evokes a stage play more than a TV show. The episode ends not with a death scene, but with psychological imprisonment, its heroine trapped behind an invisible barrier of her own making. Critics at the time dismissed it as melodrama, but later scholars recognized it as one of television's earliest examples of blending classical literature with speculative fiction. The Outer Limits didn't just borrow from Shakespeare, it proved his fears of ambition and guilt were timeless, even in outer space. The monsters were called bears. Behind the scenes, every creature on the Outer Limits had one unofficial name, the bear. It became an inside joke among the writers' room. Producer Joseph Stephano coined the term, saying, "Each story needs a bear to wrestle with something that tests our humanity." Sometimes that bear was a literal monster, but more often it was an idea: fear of progress, fear of power, or fear of ourselves. When the network demanded more monsters, Stephano joked, "Fine, we'll give them bigger bears." The term became code for the emotional core of the episode. In truth, the aliens were never the point, they were mirrors reflecting what the human characters refused to see. When people now recall the show's famous rubber suit creatures, they're really remembering something deeper: the struggle between conscience and curiosity. The bears weren't just in the scripts, they were inside everyone watching. A cleaning lady created a monster. During production of It Crawled Out of the Woodwork, the team needed a special effect to visualize an energy-based life form. Everything they tried looked ridiculous until fate intervened. A janitor vacuuming near the soundstage accidentally sucked up some dust, which burst out as a sparkling cloud when it hit a hot light. Special effects artist Milt Rice saw it and shouted, "That's it!" They filmed the effect in slow motion, inverted the footage, and layered it with eerie sound design. The result was haunting, a living storm of static that terrified audiences. Viewers assumed it was cutting-edge technology. In truth, it was a happy accident born from housekeeping. That moment became the show's signature aesthetic: invisible horror rendered through suggestion. No latex monster, no expensive model, just smoke, light, and imagination. The Outer Limits proved that true fear doesn't need form, it just needs to shimmer at the edge of reality. Too smart for its own good. Some episodes of The Outer Limits were so intellectually ambitious that even ABC didn't understand them. The Man with the Power and Obit featured discussions of ethics, identity, and existential dread that baffled sponsors. Network executives begged creator Leslie Stevens to simplify plots for average viewers. He refused. Stevens believed television should challenge, not comfort. The result was divisive brilliance. Audiences either loved or loathed it. Critics called it science fiction for philosophers, a label that doomed its mass appeal but cemented its cult legacy. Decades later, academics hailed those same scripts as visionary, addressing topics like artificial intelligence, genetic ethics, and surveillance long before they entered mainstream debate. The Outer Limits was never meant to be background noise. It demanded you listen, think, and sometimes squirm. That's why, despite its short run, it outlived its imitators. Intelligence, it turns out, never goes out of style. The day an alien went missing. Robert Culp, the charismatic star of several Outer Limits episodes, endured one of television's most infamous meltdowns during the filming of The Architects of Fear. Encased in a suffocating latex alien costume, he spent hours under blazing lights with no ventilation. Midway through a take, Culp ripped off his mask and stormed out of the studio, disappearing for nearly an hour. Crew members thought he'd fainted or quit. They found him in the parking lot, gasping for air, the costume in tatters. Director Byron Haskin rewrote the ending to allow his character to die early, turning exhaustion into tragedy. Ironically, Culp's real-life breakdown gave the episode its emotional punch. When audiences later saw his tortured alien dying on screen, They were watching genuine physical collapse turned into art. The line between performance and suffering blurred, perfectly fitting for a show about transformation gone too far. When ABC didn't know what it bought. When ABC greenlit The Outer Limits, executives thought they were getting a cheap imitation of the Twilight Zone simple monsters, safe morals, easy thrills. What they got instead was philosophical horror that questioned power, technology, and human nature. They were horrified not by the aliens, but by the implications. Scripts about government secrecy, military ethics, and corporate greed hit too close to home. Executives demanded edits, recuts, even alternate endings. Some episodes aired out of order, others were delayed until midnight slots. By season 2, budget cuts and creative interference strangled the show's bold voice. But that chaos cemented its legend. The Outer Limits wasn't meant to comfort, it was meant to confront. The network may not have understood it, but history did. What ABC saw as a problem, science fiction fans would later recognize as genius. The episode that predicted modern surveillance. In 1963, when OBIT aired, few viewers realized how terrifyingly accurate it was. The episode centered on a mysterious government machine capable of observing anyone, anywhere, at any time through invisible waves. The machine didn't just watch, it corrupted. People under surveillance grew paranoid, isolated, and obsessed. The deeper twist? It wasn't the technology that was evil, but the humans using it. This was television anticipating the age of spyware, data collection, and social media monitoring long before any of it existed. Critics later called it the most prophetic hour ever broadcast on network television. Even the U.S. Air Force reportedly requested private screenings for training on propaganda psychology. Today, the OBIT device feels eerily familiar. Glowing screens, endless feeds, and an invisible observer always watching. The Outer Limits didn't predict Big Brother, it created him. The line between science fiction and news headlines was already blurring, and the show's creators were the first to notice. The accident that made history. During production of The Zanti Misfits, the crew was tasked with creating stop-motion alien insects, grotesque, bug-like criminals exiled to Earth. But the models kept breaking. In frustration, one animator accidentally dropped a clay Zanti head, cracking its face open. Instead of repairing it, he tested how it looked under harsh light. The result was horrifying. A distorted, screaming visage that seemed both insectoid and human. Director Leonard Horn decided to keep it, filming close-ups that made the creatures twitch and convulse. Viewers were petrified. Children reportedly fled rooms. Adults wrote angry letters. Yet that mistake became legend. The cracked clay gave the aliens an uncanny realism no budget could buy. The episode went on to win design awards, inspiring future filmmakers from Ridley Scott to Guillermo del Toro. Sometimes horror isn't engineered, it's an accident caught on film. The episode that scared the U.S. Army. Nightmare was supposed to be another routine episode about soldiers captured by aliens. Instead, it became a case study in psychological warfare. The story depicted POWs subjected to manipulation, sensory deprivation, and false interrogations methods uncomfortably close to real classified military tactics. After it aired, reports surfaced that Pentagon officials contacted ABC to express concern over thematic similarities to confidential experiments. Director John Erman later admitted he had used declassified Korean War research as reference. The eerie realism made Nightmare one of the darkest episodes in TV history. It didn't just question patriotism, it dissected obedience under pressure. The military's discomfort only amplified the show's reputation as fearless science fiction one that dared to expose humanity's ugliest truths under the guise of fantasy. Decades later, the episode feels more documentary than drama. A Star Trek connection you didn't expect. Before Star Trek took flight, The Outer Limits laid the groundwork. The two shows shared sets, sound effects, and even DNA in their production teams. Legendary makeup artist Hua Chong designed aliens for both. Writer Gene Kuhn jumped ship from Limits to Trek, carrying the blueprint for serialized science fiction with moral undertones. And yes, Leonard Nimoy appeared in Production and Decay of Strange Particles. playing a scientist before donning Spock's ears. The corridors of Desilu Studios became a revolving door of imagination one week. Outer Limits filmed Fear. The next, Star Trek filmed Hope. Without its eerie older sibling, the Enterprise might never have launched. In a sense, the Outer Limits taught television how to dream beyond Earth and warned what happens when dreams go too far. The lost episode that vanished forever. Few fans know there was an episode of The Outer Limits so strange it never officially aired. Titled The Unknown, it was produced in full but deemed too disturbing for public release. Executives shelved it, then quietly re-edited parts into the premiere episode, The Galaxy Being. But the original cut featuring scenes of alien consciousness merging with humans was lost. Only production stills and fragments remain, buried in studio archives. Over the years, collectors have hunted for missing reels, rumored to survive in private hands. What makes it even weirder, the show that warned against tampering with forbidden knowledge became a victim of its own message. In the lore of 1960s television, The Unknown remains the phantom broadcast proof that the scariest episode of all might be the one we were never allowed to see. The cinematographer who became a legend. Conrad Hall was just beginning his career when The Outer Limits handed him creative freedom few cinematographers ever get. Limited sets, he created worlds with light. No budget for special effects, he painted shadows that whispered menace. Hall used contrast not just for beauty, but emotion, faces half-lit to mirror moral ambiguity, silhouettes to symbolize the unseen. His work turned the show into black and white poetry. Hall later won 3 Oscars, but always credited The Outer Limits for teaching him restraint. When you can't afford spectacle, you find soul instead. His episode, The Architects of Fear, remains a masterclass in tension, with visuals so stark they rival cinema. Hall transformed cheap television into visual literature, and generations of filmmakers are still stealing his tricks. Monsters that were too human. In The Sixth Finger, David McCallum transformed into a hyper-evolved humanoid with an enormous cranium symbolizing intellect detached from empathy. The prosthetics were so heavy, McCallum could barely move his neck, mirroring the burden of his character's mutation. The episode's deeper horror wasn't the makeup, it was the idea that intelligence, unchecked by emotion, leads to annihilation. When his character chooses to reverse evolution and die as a man, it's a poetic surrender. Knowledge without compassion isn't progress, it's doom. The story resonated with post-war audiences fearful of nuclear genius gone mad. McCallum's performance, hidden under pounds of latex, became one of the series' defining tragedies. The monster wasn't the alien. It was us still trying to evolve faster than our morality can follow. The network that wanted to cancel science. By the second season, ABC executives grew anxious. Ratings wavered, critics complained of too much thinking, and advertisers wanted simpler thrills. Their solution? Less philosophy, more monsters. Writers were ordered to tone down existential themes. Some episodes were literally rewritten mid-shoot to insert rubber creatures. When Stephano protested, he was removed from creative control. The intellectual core of The Outer Limits collapsed overnight. What replaced it was a parade of hollow imitations, aliens without allegory, fear without feeling. Ironically, the network's interference mirrored the show's own themes. Power suppressing creativity, authority fearing imagination. Within months, The Outer Limits was gone. But like any great experiment, its failure proved its point. There are limits to corporate control, and creativity is what breaks them. The forgotten legacy of fear. When The Outer Limits ended in 1965, it left behind more than reruns. It left a roadmap for intelligent horror. Stephen King later called it, "The show that taught me terror could have meaning." Its DNA runs through Alien, The X-Files, Black Mirror, and every dystopian anthology since. What made it timeless wasn't the monsters, it was empathy disguised as dread. The show asked, what happens when humanity loses itself to progress? That question became pop culture's most haunting refrain. Even its eerie opening line, "We control the horizontal and the vertical," has been referenced in everything from music videos to modern ad campaigns. The outer limits may have flickered off decades ago, but its signal never stopped transmitting. The revival that came full circle. 3 decades later, in 1995, the outer limits returned with new technology, but the same unsettling philosophy. The revival's premiere, Sand Kings, based on George R. Martin's short story, told of scientists creating living sand colonies that rebel. It echoed the original show's warning, the creator always becomes the experiment. The revival honored its ancestor not by imitation, but continuation exploring genetic ethics, artificial intelligence, and human arrogance. The return of the control voice tied generations together with a whisper, "Do not attempt to adjust the picture." That voice, once a relic of 1960s fear, became a bridge between past and future. The outer limits had come full circle, reminding us that even as screens evolve, one truth remains. The most dangerous technology is the human mind itself. So next time you hear that eerie voice telling you not to adjust your set, remember it wasn't just science fiction. It was prophecy, paranoia, and poetry wrapped in static. The outer limits dared to make television think, even when no one wanted it to. Which of these facts shocked you most? Drop your thoughts below, share this with a fellow sci-fi fan, and subscribe for more secrets from Hollywood's strangest vaults. Because in truth, there are still limits left to explore.